Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to have you join us tonight. This is Book Passage. We're in conversation with authors. My name is Cheryl Bronstein, and I am one of the staff members at Book Passage. It's an independent bookstore in the Bay Area, and we're proud to say we've been in business for over 40 years. So I want to thank all of you, our loyal customers and supporters, for helping us to keep our doors open, business flowing during this past year and a half, which has been very challenging. Book Passage has 2 stores, our main stores in Corte Madera, and we have a beautiful store in the San Francisco Ferry Building. Both the stores are now open, completely open. Come in and browse, come in and buy your books. We love to say hello and welcome you back into the store. And tonight, we have a very special event. This evening is an excellent and enlightening program, and it's very personal because our featured author, Leslie Berry, is a local Marin resident and a great friend and supporter of Book Passage. And we love promoting our local authors. Now, I've known Leslie, dare I say, for decades. I'm so proud of her writing this fabulous historical fiction book and shedding light on this period of our history that we know very little about. Newark Minutemen is an excellent pick for those book groups out there. So if you're thinking about your next book pick, this is the one to pick. And it's also wonderful for parents and teenagers and those of us who just love to read historical fiction. Newark Minutemen has recently won 2 prestigious awards, the 2020 Hemingway Grand Prize and the Goethe Finalist Award by the California Independent Book Association. That's quite an honor. And the most exciting thing is this book is also in development as a movie, which I'm sure Leslie will talk about this evening. Writing this book has been a family affair. Leslie worked closely with her mother, her aunts, her uncles, to collect family sagas from Newark in the 1940s. Her daughter, Brittany, designed this beautiful cover, and her younger daughter, Shea, wrote the audio theme song. And I'm sure it was such a pleasure to work with her fabulous kids. Leslie actually took boxing lessons from Marin City's late Boone Green to give authenticity to the story. And I can tell you after reading it, those passages really ring true. I'm curious to know if she has used any of these found boxing skills to keep her family members in line. I'm sure we'll find out. Leslie's in conversation tonight with her agent, Kimberley Cameron. And Kimberley is also a local Marin resident, and we're always delighted to see her in the store on so many occasions. Kimberley is president of Kimberley Cameron and Associates and has been a literary agent for almost 30 years. Her most recent successes are The Channel Sisters, the Willie Mays book, 24 Life Lessons and Stories, and Barbara Boxer's memoir, The Art of Tough. She's very talented and is a supportive mentor to her debut authors. So please enjoy tonight's program. Ask many questions as you want. There'll be an ability to do that. We love all the support. We love all the questions. And again, this is the book, Newark Minutemen. So without further ado, I turn this program back over to our very celebrated author, Leslie Berry and Kimberley Cameron. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl, so much. And what an incredible introduction and all very complete and accurate. And I am so excited to be here in our local Marin County and sharing the story with Book Passages, which we've almost raised our kids in Book Passages. As Cheryl said, I've recently published this historical novel, Newark Minutemen. It is in development to be a movie, and it's a historical romance based on a family story that my mom helped me write. We worked on it for about 2 years. she was very sad when that was over. But anyway, very happy when it was published. Uh, so
Kimberly will
Kimberly, should we
start.
change? Yeah.
Leslie, I
Yes.
met Leslie just a little while ago. We haven't known each other for a long time, but she is terrific. And I read her book in 2 days. I mean, I just read it so fast because it was so easy to read and so um, it just was so invigorating. I really couldn't put it down. It was really that good. So I have some questions for you. And so, number one, you are uniquely qualified to write this book. Newark Minutemen is inspired by a family story, as you said, from the Great Depression in New Jersey. The story you tell is in part American history that not many people know about. There's a lot of things in there I didn't know about either. It's amazing. How did you find it and decide to write it? And tell us a little bit how it started out as a screenplay before a book.
Sure. So, yes, so I have four kids and lots of busy stuff going on, and I hadn't really planned to develop this story. So it kind of found me, and the way it found me was a little over 5 years ago. My mom is actually she just turned 96 yesterday, was her birthday, uh, but on her 90th birthday, my sisters and I had a big party for her, and we got all the old cousins and friends together. And to give you a little bit of background, my mom is that classic. She's a daughter of Jewish immigrants who settled in Newark, New Jersey. She had four older brothers. They went through, uh, great depressions and pandemics and wars and all kinds of things. And we heard all these stories growing up, and we sort of half believed them or half listened. Come to find out, all of them were true. But at this party, my mom started. They were talking with some of the cousins, and they were like, "Esther, do you remember all the stories about your brother Harry?" Well, her brother Harry was a prize fighting boxer, and we all knew that. And he had a Golden Glove trophy that we'd all seen, and he had the newspaper article that we'd all read. But they started saying, "Remember when your mom would yell at him, in Yiddish or whatever, when he'd come in at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she said, 'What are you doing out there beating up the Nazis?'" And I was like, well, okay, wait a minute. This is Newark, New Jersey, 1930s, Great Depression. There's not a war yet. What do you mean beating up the Nazis? You mean when he went off to war? And they're all like, no, no, no. There was a whole American Nazi shadow party in America that was a very serious threat. And your uncle was part of a group that was put together by the mafia and our government. And the group was called the Newark Minutemen. And they were this group of boxers that were recruited by, like I said, the mob and our government to basically derail this party from Germany, the Hitler Shadow Party that was gaining this foothold. And my cousin and I, we had never heard this. And growing up, and by the way, we're Jewish. We're like, well, how come we never heard about this story? And I became possessed almost with learning about it. And I got my mom and I took her out there on the road, and we're like, we are going to go talk to all your cousins because I don't know what to believe here. And of course, when they started talking together, all the memories started coming out. One thing led to another, and it was incredible. I found these thousands and thousands of pages of FBI documents that had only relatively recently been unsealed. I'm talking like 10 years ago, but that's kind of recent for that thing to happen. And read through them and found archives. And the most incredible thing I found actually were these diaries by these, it was two brothers. One was a newspaper man for the Chicago Daily News, The other was an FBI man he was part of the group that brought down Dillinger. And these two brothers went undercover for 6 months into this. It was called the German-American Bund. And they basically got very close with the inner circle. We had this American Hitler who organized this whole nationwide group of thousands and thousands of people. And these two brothers got in for 6 months, wrote these diaries, which I happened to find, and then published this, I believe it was a 14-day serial about their experience during the Great Depression with this German-American party that was taking over our country. And you read these firsthand diaries, it's extreme. You would think you're sitting in Nazi Germany listening to everything from the way people felt about anybody that was different to how do we deal with this and get rid of this happening in, how do we take control of America, basically.
Well, I thought it was amazingly interesting, this whole idea of how many Americans were involved with this and were believing it. I didn't really read about that in history books either. Growing up, I didn't know about the American or the Nazi influence in America, which I found profound and amazing. So tell us a little bit more about what you found in these diaries and what compelled you to actually, you get all this information in your family and everything, and it's unbelievable, but you weren't a writer yet, right, at that point, and you just decided to write a screenplay first based on this. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so what I found in everything that I was finding was at the heart of everything was conflict. And, in the 1930s, if you remember our history, everybody's hungry and jobless, and everything's democracy is teetering. We've got this divided America. And so everybody's looking for what's the answer here? How are we going to eat tomorrow? So this whole period is set over the Great Depression, 1930s. And it was this very fertile ground for alternatives to democracy. And you have this triple threat going on. You have our economic crisis that lasted a lot longer than people expected. You have these aggressive dictators like taking over countries, and we see some of this happening today in Afghanistan, like this. They're just all of a sudden transformation of a country, and here we are with this divided America. And so what do we do? Whatever we're doing isn't working. So people started saying, okay, well, to the left, we have what was known as communism, which is still fairly new in the 30s. And then in the middle, we have these policies, which FDR policies, that were really socialism. The country's going to take your hand and give you jobs, and then to the far right we have fascism, and remember, this is before we knew the punchline here, what was going on, and people were looking across the ocean and saying, well, is that so bad? Everybody's got a job and they're going to school and all that. Well, this Hitler satellite called the German-American Bund came into our country and filled this void, realized there was a void here and filled it. And what I'd actually like to do at this moment, because when there's a clip here, I'm just going to show you part of it, that is going to show you an event on, so this is February, President's Day, 1939, 6 months before the war started, and you're going to see the American Hitler fills Madison Square Garden, which is the icon of America at the time. He fills it with American Nazis and calls for Der Tag, the day of a Nazi party. So here's what's happening. Nick, you can roll.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protect ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite hand of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
Then,
Okay, so what you just saw there was real footage, pieces of real footage, and you can find a lot more online too. You can find, I think it was several hours actually. You can find all the footage. But this was the German-American Bund. They were heavily funded and nationwide. And at the top, you've got that guy that you saw there, Fritz Kuhn, Führer Fritz Kuhn, they called him. And what he did was he took America, he divided us up into three, and he created the same structure as in Germany, where you have the leader at the top and all the people that report, you just report straight up in the hierarchy. And there were thousands of cells in each part of our country with where these soldiers were recruited, and they would smuggle in Nazi uniforms, and they would train and practice and walk down the avenues, parade down the avenues. They would actually get guns from our NRA. At the time, the NRA was giving free guns away. So our NRA was funding this group, this extremist group. They were trained by our National Guard. And there was an inner circle that was trained like they were called the OD. And they were trained like the SS, or the inner circle that Hitler had in Germany. And one of the other really brilliant things he did was he bought 25 pieces of real estate across the United States, and he turned those into Nazi youth camps. And the whole idea of, there was a German way to say it, but basically the theme there was, a little piece of Germany in America. And really what he was saying was, the idea was America was going to be absorbed into Germany. That was the sort of the grand plan of overall of the Reich. But so in these Nazi camps, which was one of the most actually probably shocking things to me, and you can find photos that are pretty shocking of children who are being brainwashed and propaganda and learning Mein Kampf and practicing how to march and wearing the uniforms, no English. And it was interesting because, some people would argue today that, well, this was a minority group. But what was happening then was, and we can relate today, radio was becoming a big medium during the 30s. And with the radio, all of a sudden, you could bring these disparate groups together that all perhaps had an affinity or a sympathy, or sympathizers to what was going on over Germany. So you could bring them all together and speak one message to them. So all of a sudden, 20,000 was really maybe a million. And when I was developing this story, I started to realize how dramatic this period was. And it really is one of the biggest untold stories leading up to World War II. And it's, in fact, right in the crosshairs of the beginning of the Holocaust, 1938. The beginning of the Holocaust is considered Kristallnacht. And, when I was writing it, I discovered this portrait of some of the choices that Americans were making because they were hopeless. And it revealed, our responses to fascism.
Well, it's so interesting because, when you say that radio kind of brought everybody together, well, social media is kind of doing the same thing and today. And these people are without compass, some of them. And so they're being attracted to some sort of ideology. But so my big question is, number one, do we know how many people were involved in this? Could it have been 1 million people?
So the numbers I can give you is in the video that you saw in Madison Square Garden, there were 25,000 people. So that's a start, right? That's a minimum, because that's 25,000 in New York on that day. The numbers, the estimates go all the way up to, there was a father, I don't know if you've heard this name, Father Coughlin was this extreme fascist he was actually the radio personality, and he had he had officially 1 million followers, and the Bund had a direct mail list of 1 million. So the numbers range everywhere from 20,000 to 1 million. Was it 1 million that were officially signed up to be the German-American Bund? No, I don't think so. But there was momentum happening. And
well, that kind of brings me to my next question. So you're saying like the NRA was actually giving them guns and things like that. Mm-hmm. Why didn't somebody stop this? That is my big question. Is like, how were they getting away with this anti-American kind of?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the questions that stopped me in my tracks. And so again, remember, this is before World War II. We don't know the punchline yet. We don't really know, is this bad, good? Some people could argue, yes, we did, but officially we didn't. We had just gotten out of another war, so a lot of people didn't want to go back to war. At least that generation had just come out of a war. So we were this divided country for war. But the biggest reason is because of First Amendment rights. And even though these guys were marching down USA avenues, New York Avenue, right in our faces, we couldn't do it. I mean, with their hands in the air and American flag in one hand, swastika flag in the other. And one thing I kind of learned along the way too was that not only were we a divided country, which we can relate to today, we're basically 50-50 for our parties. By the way, I think we're 50-50 almost with governors as well. The added division was the Supreme Court. So you had 6, I believe it was 6 and 6, or was it 6 and 6? Whatever it was, they were split right down the middle. And what that meant is when somebody went and said, complain or said or brought a a complaint about, well, is this really First Amendment rights or not? The Supreme Court couldn't make a decision. They were split down the middle. So there was no law. So when there's no law, what happens? other people step in or we make up our own laws, because the reason we follow our government is because they're going to protect us. If there's no law, we need to find another solution. So what happened was our government actually went to, so again, remember, this is the Depression. Put it in context, 1929 had just happened, just a couple of years earlier. Everybody loses their money, except who? The mafia. They had money, they had cash, they had power. And so what happened was our government went to the head of the Jewish mob, which even a lot of people don't know there was a Jewish mob in addition to Italian mob. His name was Meyer Lansky, and they said, look, we need your help. We can't do it above ground, above board. We need your help, and we'll pay you. And he said, you don't need to pay me. You just look the other way. And so he went to his buddy in Newark, New Jersey, Longy's Willman, who was the head of the mob for Newark. And back then, Longy ran all the sports betting, which included the boxers. And so he said, okay, we have a great network here of boxers that we can train and pay. They would give them $100 every time they went out. And these boxers, called the Newark Minutemen, became this resistance. And the reason they were called the Minutemen actually was because on a minute's notice, they could get 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 of these boxers to go out and do what was needed to be done, whether it was they would go out and they would help stop demonstrations, they would go to meetings, they would go undercover, they'd take pictures. They took pictures of some of the camps. There's a whole set of pictures that were taken by the Newark Minutemen. So my uncle was a Newark Minuteman, and he was part of these activities. And part of the story is about the Newark Minutemen going undercover to stop this group that was on. So this is really a story about these resistance fighters that were organized by the Jewish mob to stop our country from this threat.
And they were really the American resistance, really, in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Which brings me to your next question. I mean, when I read some of the things that I read in this book about these camps and how they treated women, etc., I was shocked, and I was amazed the fact that this was actually going on. So, you get this little piece of history from your family, and, you could have made this a nonfiction book because it's so much of it in your book is true. And you use Kuhn as a major figure and all these people in your family too. So what made you decide to turn it into historical fiction?
Well, yeah, I definitely had rooms full of documents that I could have turned into a documentary. I knew people that could have talked. I could have turned it into a true story. But I really, and I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to write a story, and by the way, you asked me before about, this did start out as a screenplay. So remember, I'm coming from the mindset of film and screenplay person. And I always wanted to write a story that was going to be a story that woke up people on something. And especially, I wanted to do a story where sort of the hero inside of us could be woken up. And I, in film, there's sort of some unwritten rules, an unwritten rule for writing an action film, which to me, this would have been this action, this violence, all this stuff that was going on, that can be superficial. The unwritten rule for an emotional movie is it can be boring. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the Titanic approach. I'm going to take this whole historical setting, get people, understanding what was going on in this lost history, and layer over a conflict on top of conflict that is this love story that, star-crossed love story of a Jewish boxer who falls in love with the daughter of the enemy. And Of course, with a triangle love affair, you always have to include that. But so the story itself actually it follows this Jewish boxer. His name is Yale. He's part of this group of boxers called the Newark Minutemen, organized by the Jewish mafia and our government to go up against the Bund. And Yale goes undercover for the resistance in New Jersey. And along the way, he falls in love with the daughter of the enemy.
Well, you do pull us in. I mean, there's no question. I mean, the way you embellish, and good historical fiction is based in fact, and your facts are well documented. But again, you have an emotional investment in the story, and you did that really well. I recommend this book. Just saying. Yeah, and so it's part historical romance, it's part historical fiction. It's there's so much in it that makes it very rich. It's really a great read, and that's why I was very honored to do this interview tonight. So I have another question for you. Why did you use 4 narrators to tell this story? That's like 4 different points of view. It's hard to pull off, but you did it very well.
And everybody told me I should not do it. They said, this is your first novel. All my editors are like, this is your first novel, don't do this. And it was probably my biggest challenge of, creating 4 different voices but anyway, I was compelled to do it. And the reason I was because, so this story is about bad guy versus bad guy. We're talking the mafia versus Nazis. And I was like, I didn't want to be one-sided because I wanted to create empathy on both sides. And, because it depended on whose shoes you were, whether, you were doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And so I wanted the reader to experience the fears and the wicked and the good and the bad of the mafia guys, as well as those on the Nazi side. And I wanted them to hear these different voices. I wanted to create empathy, and I wanted you as the reader, especially, to say, why in the world would a Jewish boxer end up, and I've been, in some of my knee-jerk reviews have been, that's impossible. A Jewish boxer would never end up with the daughter of an American Nazi, the daughter of an American Nazi. And I'm not going to give away the story. There is a punchline that makes that make sense too. But I wanted you to hear her head, what was going on inside of her. It really is. So the 4 characters are Longis Willman, who's the gangster, Führer Fritz Kuhn, the Nazi head of the Nazis, and then the hero and the heroine. And it's really the heroine that has the character arc that changes. Yale is Yale. He is him because of something he saw as a child. He's all about revenge. The mafia's guy who he is, the Führer, he's who he is. It's her that has the arc. And I could have done it just from her, I guess, but again, I wanted you to be challenged with, are they good? Are they bad? Do I agree? Do I not agree? So that was my goal.
Well, you really hit your goal, because I will say, when I read it, and I was really torn as she was. It's like I could see why she would not trust Yale and that side, and just be caught up in this Nazi stuff that was going on. And we really saw inside her heart, which I think was really well done on your part. It was really an interesting profile to see her choices and why she made them.
Right.
So they were really.
She's an 18-year-old girl, and for her to resist her family and her father and what she grows up with was that was huge conflict for her.
Mm-hmm. So overall, what is the message you want to convey with this book? That's kind of like the theme? What do you want? What do you want people to come away with this book?
I think the two big things are, one is, don't be complacent. My mom actually, she asked me today, she's always calling me and giving me advice of what I should talk about in these book talks. So she said, she's a 96-year-old woman. She gets around. She's very aware. But she goes, what can I do? What could I do if something like that happened? What is the message to me today? And I said, Mom, I said, let me tell you a story. I said, I was at the airport not long ago, and I saw a suitcase sitting there. And we hear this repeated thing: if you see a suitcase, report it, report it, report it. And I don't know how many people report it, but I went over and reported it. My husband laughed at me. And the guy said, no, she's doing absolutely the right thing. So my point was to her was that you need to be aware, you can't be complacent, and you need to take action. You can't just freeze. You can't just be scared. If you see something wrong and that's not right, do something. And that's the first step. And, we can talk all about education and all that other stuff, but I guess my first takeaway is don't be complacent. Don't be complacent, especially when you don't agree or don't think things are right. And then the second thing is, again, this is somebody talking mom just turned 96 yesterday and is very, very lucky to have gone through this experience with her, is a message about legacy and making sure you talk to your mother or aunt or cousins or whatever and get these stories before it's too late, because they really are what you're made up of, and they're really what we leave going forward.
Mm-hmm. And you've really left that for your family, which is really, really great. Okay, so my next question is, where are you going from here in your career, and what are you going to write next?
Oh, I know. You asked me that the other day. Well, number one, I didn't realize that this was going to launch right when the pandemic started. The ebook launched last 2020 when the pandemic started, and I didn't realize how hard that was going to be, and all the creativity it took. I think this is almost my 100th talk here, but so I'm a little bit tired, but either, and it's going to depend to where the movie goes. I do have an idea for a sequel, even though I know sequels aren't, you told me, always the best choice. And I love the idea of these American stories that have never been told. Mm-hmm. The Holocaust ones always have heroes, and there's a zillion of those, and I could do some of that, but there are a couple other American stories that I think are important and fill in what's important for us as a country too. So that's some of my ideas, if I can get some energy up.
Well, I was really amazed by what was going on American soil during this time, and I really had never heard about that, and so it was quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, when I wrote one version of my screenplay, and I made my 17-year-old son read it, and of course at first he's like, "Oh, Mom, I don't want to read this," and then he read it, he goes, "I really like this." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because I never heard of it before. We never learned it in school." And so that was a good thing. And then also because it was younger. Another thing that I'm very happy with, that this wasn't intended really, but we all know that some of the Holocaust victims are leaving us, and who's going to tell their story? And one thing that I've discovered is that because this is an American story, a story that happened in America, and because it's younger people and boxers and sort of this exciting, I don't want to call it, this action type story, it's attracting younger people. And sometimes when I do my little ads on Facebook, and every time I do it younger, I'm like, wow, younger people do like it. So I think it crosses generations, and that's exciting to me that it makes an impact that way.
Okay, we have a question here. And
Okay.
by the way, everybody who's out there, we're certainly open to any questions you might have for Leslie. It's a fascinating read. I really, really enjoyed it. Sharon says, I wanted to know if Leslie has seen the show Hunters. It was about Nazi hunting as well.
Yes, I have. I watched a couple of those. And it's so for people who don't know, I can't remember, it's the 70s or 80s it takes place, and it's about this group of hunters that are finding Nazis who've hidden in America. And it's been criticized for being kind of extreme sometimes, where I think these guys, if I recall, these guys go out and they're judge and jury for these Nazis that are in America, that somehow hid in America. So I find it interesting. I do think sometimes they go a little too far, but and I can't remember how much is based on true or not, but I have seen it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question from Liz Winfield. How have these insights into the past affected your worldview and of the present? Which is a very good question, because I was going to ask you a little later about any parallels that you're seeing today with this. So that's a good question.
Yeah, no, I mean, some things are meant to be at a certain time, and it's amazing that I launched this book during our 2020 year, where so much was unrest, um, and there are lots of parallels, and I learned so much from some of these events that I did, because I was talking to people who were born in the 30s still, and I would ask them. I said, "Do you see parallels?" And they were like, "Absolutely. We see a lot of parallels with, the divided America, and it's interesting. What's really still the same is, people ask me, are these the Nazis from then? The Nazis today, are they the Nazis that were Hitler's Nazis, or these American Nazis? And they're different, and certainly there's not this great Hitler out there that is this leader. But what's the same is their fear. And the fear is really that, I guess they call it the replacement theory, that the white race is going to disappear. And the fear, it's a really hard fear to battle too, because if their fear was just that, immigrants are going to take our jobs, okay, well, let's do some things and we can change that structure around, or incent, or stop him, or whatever. But to address the fear that the race that people identify with is going to disappear is a difficult task. And that's why I think it's so extreme. And by the way, it's not just in America, it's worldwide. And it's challenged. The extremists are challenged by one group of people here. They're challenged by different group of people in Europe and worldwide. But it's a worldwide problem. And in some parts of the world, by the way, China, India, they don't really even study what happened in World War II. So we have, I think, some bigger challenges than people might think of, perhaps an unrest and people trying to resolve their fears and how extreme they're going to take that.
Right. So when you were talking and having these discussions about the book, did you ever come across anybody who's actually at one of these rallies and remembers it?
Oh, let's see.
Or remembers those times where that existed and knew of it?
You know, I did not. I mean, my mom is probably the closest. She wasn't there. She was like 15 when her brother was 23 and went. And I did know my uncle till I think he died in 1990, but he didn't talk about this. He talked about boxing, but not this. The secondhand information I've gotten, interestingly, is I've met a lot of sons and daughters of the mob and of the Newark Minutemen, and they have carried stories, secondhand stories that we've shared. I'm actually have become quite friendly with Meyer Lansky's grandson, who knew his grandfather quite well. Meyer Lansky was the head of the Jewish mob. So it was all secondhand, and I'm also have become friendly with a guy named Myron Sugarman, who his claim is he is the last Jewish gangster, and his father was involved, and he knows a great deal about all this and what was going on. And so he grew up as a boy hearing these stories, knowing these stories, but not at that event firsthand. I mean, most people are already probably passed with that. One of the most interesting things I found, though, was I came across a book that's out of print now, written by this guy in 1970 he was a social studies teacher, and he found out about the Nazi camps. And he quit his job because he became so fascinated, and he went around and interviewed the children that were now grown American children who had been in the Nazi camps.
Wow.
And so I do have those stories. And in fact, when I was sent this book, I opened it up, and I don't want to exaggerate, but some papers came out. And some of the papers were the letters written from these children. Well, they're grown up now, but they were the children that were in the camps.
Well, that's a fascinating idea for another book.
Yeah, exactly.
I have another question from Steve Katz. Amazing story, he says, exclamation point. Question, who's your dream cast for Newark Minuteman, the movie? You must have some ideas.
I do. Well, so I'm torn between Fritz Kuhn, Leonardo DiCaprio. Let's have a vote.
He could do it.
Leonardo DiCaprio. And I think somebody would be so interesting, but I don't know if he'd do it because he never plays the bad guy, but Tom Hanks, because he looks a little like him. He looks a little like him. So I don't know if there's a preference either way, but that's my Fritz Kuhn. Robert Downey Jr. is my dream for Longy's Willman, because I think he looks like him as well. Longy's Willman was this, if you talk to my mom and anybody else back then, he took care of the neighborhood. Everybody loved him. He was gorgeous. He had Hollywood girlfriends, and he's got the Robert Downey Jr. look. So when I'm ready, I'm waiting to push his number. The younger ones, I get a little confused because every time I come up with somebody, I'm like, oh, they're not that young anymore. But the brothers that what are the two brothers? Steve, what are the two brothers that I wanted in here? They're two famous brothers. I can't remember the name at the well. But anyway.
What about the woman?
I can't figure that out. Does anybody have any ideas? Text me.
Well, I was reading her, and you know who I thought of is Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah.
She'd be pretty good at that.
Yeah. Oh, the other one was what's the one that was it's not Ron Howard's daughter, but she played with Ron Howard's daughter in The Help. What's her name? The other one that's in The Help with the red hair. I think she has red hair. Anyway.
We have some more questions though.
Okay.
So Jim Bergman asks, thanks for your presentation. Have you heard of or read the book Dark Invasion, 1915, Germany's Secret War and the Hunt for the First Terrorist Cell in America by Howard Blum. It's a good read.
No, I would do that. Has it ever been made into a movie?
I don't think so, but anyway, that's
Curious.
good
That sounds
information
good.
to have for this audience.
Yes.
And then Liz again asks, how did you find your way to make a story arc to carry the facts?
Okay, I'm going to reveal my cards here. Okay, so when I had this idea, I went to my friend. Some of the people in this group might know her, Sue Turley, who was she's in the documentary and she's in feature film now too. And I brought her this idea, and she knew my mom, and she said, "Oh my God, this is a great idea. Go write a screenplay." And I said, "Sue, I have no idea how to write a screenplay." She goes, "You can do it. I know." I said, "All right, fine." So I went up and I Googled the Titanic, and I followed the arc of the love affair in Titanic. That's how I started.
That's
It
really
changed
great.
a little bit, but I will reveal my cards.
That's really an interesting story, backstory there. So Ariel asks, Ariel Smythe, I think it is, was most of your researching and interviewing received positively? Are there any other stories to share about that?
Yes, I think one of the most interesting ones actually was the high school that all the Jewish kids went to, and if you talk to probably any Jewish person over 60 that grew up in that area, they probably went to Weequahic High School. And Weequahic was the high school. I don't know if anybody saw Plot Against America or read Plot Against America. That's the high school there. So my mom is an alumni, my cousin's an alumni. And what we did was we emailed the alumni group and we said, listen, we're collecting anecdotes about Newark Minutemen. Anybody that was a Newark Minutemen, send us your anecdotes. And we got so many great stories.
Wow.
Of, all these different things that happen, and I include many in the book. So that was probably the most one of the most interesting pieces of research that weren't so standard. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the diaries that I found. Oh yes, okay. So I found these diaries of these two brothers I mentioned that infiltrated for 6 months and then wrote this story. And I reached out. I found on Ancestry. I reached out to the son of John Metcalf, who was the newspaper guy, and I found him. He lives in California, actually, and we became friends. I talked for hours. He sent me all these other things. He said, use it. I love it. And he sent me these stories. One of the most interesting stories, I said, what happened after your father, after they published the newspaper articles? And he said, I remember I was a little boy. I think he was 4 or 5 or 6 or something. He said, we were inside having dinner, and all of a sudden we hear a machine gun go by and machine gun our car. And yeah, I guess that was obviously another interesting story.
Is an interesting story. Okay, so Sharon Fernandez asks, did the Italian mafia also help Lansky with this?
They did, let's see, did they directly? I mean, there were many groups that helped the Minutemen because there were many groups that the Nazis were, against: Catholics, homosexuals, blacks, groups from Spain. Spain had just fallen into a fascist group. So there were many groups that sort of helped the Minutemen, or the Minutemen brought in to help them as well. The reason they kept it so specifically to these Minutemen were because there were other groups in other cities, but they would get out of hand and people would get hurt. It was bad publicity. And that's why the Newark Minutemen the Jewish mob said, let's train a specific group, let's train them the rules. We're going to, have a system here. And so for sort of control, they were the focus of the guys that went out. It's interesting because the mayor of New York at the time, LaGuardia, was half Italian, half Jewish.
Wow.
And so obviously back then there was all kinds of
ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also what the 30s was the time that the mafia decided to become organized, organized crime, right? So they called it Murder Inc. And it was 3 or 4 Italians, 3 or 4 Jews, and they kind of were all working together. So I think by default they were working together, but this was the weapon, if you will, or group or resistant group that was designated to do certain things for fighting against the rising party.
Wow. It's such a fascinating story. We're getting close to 6:30, but is there any other questions anybody wants to ask? You can put them in your chat box real fast. We can go a little over if you'd like, but I have to say that it's a fascinating story and really well written, and I highly recommend it to everybody.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you very much. There's Cheryl.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I'm going to hold the book up one more time. Newark Minutemen. You high school teachers out there that are listening tonight, this would be an amazing addition to your curriculum. Give the store a call. We're happy to help you purchase this book for your classrooms. Book groups, people out there looking for your next book group pick. This is it. Look no further. This is an amazing story. It's an excellent read. It's quick, it's fun, and it's so much amazing historical information that you really never knew about. So it would be a wonderful book group book. And Leslie, you can probably email Leslie, book groups out there. If you want to email Leslie any of your questions, she'd probably be more than happy to answer them. So what a great idea it would be. You'd be the hero of your book group. And Jewish organizations, other kind of religious organizations out there, another wonderful book for your congregants and your clients and your customers. We're happy to help you. So give the store a call and we can order in bulk for you. It makes a fabulous gift. This was an amazing presentation, Leslie. Your research is just impeccable. You are so talented. This book is fabulous, and I know the movie's going to be amazing as well. There's so many wonderful things in your future that I'm so excited for you. I want to thank you and Kimberly both for sharing this experience with us tonight. And again, happy reading. Buy this book at Book Passage. We're happy to help you. Again, our stores are open. We'll see you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie.